highly networked groups, like the RA, potentially PECs. They're the major movers and shakers of scientific change across history, across disciplines. Evidence would indicate there are 3 or 4 per generation per discipline. Think of the quantum phase group, Niels Bohr's group. Think of the quantum group, Niels Bohr's group at Copenhagen. Think of the phage group in the molecular biology. You can also think of the Skinnerians, for instance, in psychology. I'm talking about this on the basis of a long-term study of the Resilience Alliance, but also other organizations, dozens of these organizations, these groups historically. Mark Twain, American humorist, famously said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes a lot. This is the case with these groups. You can go back to Hellenic Greece and look at intellectual groups there. You can look at contemporary cutting-edge science. You see a lot of the same similar social dynamics. Coherent groups arise when a small group of scientists totally convince themselves of the generative capacity of a new way of understanding something. Their growth is enabled by structural and social factors. Structurally, an acknowledgement within the community of incompleteness of current ways of knowing. Anomalies have built up in current paradigms, and there's a need for new ways of understanding. Second, that there's sufficient attention space. And what I mean by that is that there's a niche. There's enough journal space. There's enough space for books, publications, talks like the ones we're talking about here. There's a niche where the group can survive and grow. It's a structural condition for this. Access to key resources. This is money for meetings like the one we're standing in now, but also access to intellectual networks, journal space. Ecology and Society is a good example of this. Grad students. Grad students are really important for articulating and framing these things and for bringing them out to new generations. Socially, intense face-to-face interactions. You find these things happening at what are called magnet places. The Stockholm Resilience Center could be one of these places. Places where people work together intensely face-to-face. It lowers the transaction costs of scientific communication. It imparts a velocity to the group's work. They're able to produce science quickly at a rapid pace. Diverse expertise. This is a kind of social stoichiometry, if you want to use a chemical analogy. The correct proportions of different types of scientists, also of different ages. It's about proportionality. Rather than having one social scientist, it's about balancing these out. Or ecologists. Second, organizational and intellectual leadership. Oftentimes, these devolve into 2 different people within the group. People take on specific roles, and those roles are integral, and they're also uneliminable in the sense that sometimes key people are necessary, and if they drop out, the group changes, the structure of the group changes. Also, key socio-emotional processes. Deeply creative scientific thinking is fundamentally deviant. It flies in the face of orthodoxy. It flies in the face of established ways of knowing, and it takes a lot of emotional support. Rituals are important for this. You can think of the quantum physics group, Niels Bohr's group, did a lot of rock climbing together. They had ping pong tournaments. The phage group went on isolated retreats in the Anza Desert. They engaged in devastating critiques of each other's work. No critique from the outside could be as strong as that from within. It builds the group's strength. Instrumental intimacy. Enough trust within the group to know that I can articulate half-baked ideas. I can articulate ideas that go against the grain. I can articulate ideas that aren't fully formed yet, and I won't be judged. I won't be censored. The group encouraged this. All right? Max Delbruck of the phage group always said, push it a little further than you think the data will allow you. Escalating reciprocity. I start to trust, know, and idolize other people in the group. I feel I owe it to them to match or exceed the quality of their work. Escalating reciprocity. It serves to elevate the level of the group's work. It makes it a lot better. Flow. Probably everyone in this room, if you play sports or if you're in video games, whatever you do, you know the feeling of being in the zone. This also happens in science. There's certain other people, when you get together, you'll express things and have creative moments you would have in no one else's company. This happens in these groups. They build the capacity for group flow. This comes from positive psychology, the work of Csikszentmihalyi. These are why these groups grow. Traps. Why do these groups decline? 2 different forces. Ideational decay, things that lessen the capacity of the group's ideas to affect the intellectual sphere. Fastest gun syndrome. This group is now at the top of its game. Its value as an intellectual target is elevated. People from the outside start attacking because it elevates theirs by denigrating those at the top. Faddishness. People on the outside of the network, dilettantes, start to parade weak versions of the theory, superficial versions of the theory. The group at the center gets attacked on the basis of those weak versions. Loss of novelty. Thomas Kuhn said, all scientific work, everything we do, has to be both grounded in the past and extend into the future. One of the worst compliments you can get is, that's a great paper, just like the last 5 times you wrote it. Right? This happens in these groups. Obliteration. Sometimes groups work get accepted as fundamentally true. You don't have to cite Darwin to say evolution happens anymore. Evolution is. Right? Darwin fades into the background. I would argue in some way that's the best any of us can hope for our work. It becomes part of the corpus and we fade out. Emotional decay. The growth and diversity of the group challenges the group's ability to assimilate it into that culture. The group gets bigger and it's more difficult to have those key processes. Loss of emotional memory. Key members retire, people die, people drop out. Some of those roles are lost. Alternative identities and solidarities, particularly within younger members of the group. Thank you. Attack from high status people on the outside. I think in the RA you can see now people in vulnerability, adaptation, political ecology, lobbing grenades in. And you can see people on the RA also working and trying to integrate those to make a bigger, broader resilience theory. You see this in other groups too. Also sometimes efforts at control by people who've been in the group for a long time. They're very emotionally wed to the way the group was, and they want to maintain the way the group dynamics were. The group calcifies, new members balk, social conflict emerges. Are all these groups destined to collapse? I think it depends on what you mean by a group and what you mean by collapse. It is, of course, the iron law, unfortunately, that everything in this universe that comes to be must pass. But historical evidence would indicate that the influence of the group can extend across to future networks and future generations, future groups. This can happen in a few different ways. I think these processes are central to it. First is cross-generational socialization, not of specific ideas, but of the processes, the social processes that allow for coherent groups to develop and grow. Think of Max Delbruck. He was involved in the Copenhagen group, a brother of one of the mathematicians there. He then led the Phage group on to fame. He knew how to make this work. You can think of Buzz Halling, too, from the 70s, his work in BC. You can think of his work at IASA, and you can think of his work at Resilience Alliance. He kind of knew the formula, and he made it happen. He was also one of those key emotional social leaders. Continued access to those same resources, journal space, networks, grad students, magnet places. New research methods, very important. You want to generate new ideas, new results, new kinds of findings that you can integrate into the group. Tolerance of new ideas, solidarities, and spin-off groups. You have to be amenable to new relationships developing in organic ways while also facilitating some of those old processes that kept the group going. Supporting critique from inside, as well as tolerating it from outside and trying to integrate those into the group. Don't get your hackles up. Don't let it become us and them. Letting go, emotionally, socially, intellectually. It's critical. I would argue that one of the most difficult and challenging and important things in all of our lives, professionally and personally, is this ability to let go of our colleagues, of our professions, of our lovers, of people that pass away in our lives. It's very difficult, but it's important. I don't want to get too philosophical here, but we're the stuff of the stars, right? And it's not individuals that create science. It's groups and networks. And in that sense, by following these techniques, I think, and by socializing new members, by creating new networks, the influence of the group continues across time, across groups, and across networks. Thank you.